restitution of Romani artifacts and artworks. And my name is Angela Kocze. I'm the chair of the Romani Studies program. And this very special panel, it's a part of the conference, which is called Critical Romani Studies. And I'm really, really happy and grateful to have my colleagues as well as with us Anna Mirga, who is the Deputy Director of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture. And we have Hajnalka Somogyi, who is the Director of the OFF-Biennale, to organize this very important panel. And actually, I would like to start with a little story that where we started this kind of really important dialectical and constructive relationships and dialogues. Some of us been a curator of the gallery art, which is a really, really small gallery. Unfortunately, it doesn't, it's not working right now, but we hope that it's going to be launched again. And we were always thinking about that arts is really provides such a conceptual language, which is always been ahead of the discourse of social studies. And I'm really grateful that, you know, my colleagues from the art world, they can speak about things which are unspeakable in social studies. And also you are shedding a light on the blind spot of social studies, sociology, and anthropology. And I'm grateful to have this very critical and very progressive panel today. And I would like to give the floor to my colleagues, Anna Mirga-Kruszelnicka from the ERIAC.
Thank you, Angela. Welcome, everybody. I'm Anna Mirga-Kruszelnicka. I'm Deputy Director of ERIAC and the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, and we are very excited about this event today. So let me first start with a few words of thank yous. So first of all, we are very happy to again join forces with the Central European University and the Romani Studies program around the building of this Critical Romani Studies conference, but in particular around the topic that we will be discussing today, which, as Angela already mentioned, is very cutting edge, extremely timely, and also, dare I say, somehow avant-garde, and at least in the context of the Romani discussions. So it's very important we're here. I'm also very happy that we're here together with the OFF-Biennale team. You'll hear very soon from Hajnalka, who is our colleague with whom we're working together around these issues. So just let me say a few words about where ERIAC stands in these discussions. So of course, I think we'll hear a little bit about this today, but this is also no news to you that Roma cultural heritage and our culture in general is at risk, and it has been conceptualized and developed and represented for centuries through majority eyes and through eyes of the others. It has been very recently really that the Romani scholars, artists, and now also curators and collectors are starting to reclaim back a way of representing ourselves through institutions and through practices as well. But of course, the state of affairs for at this stage is very difficult. The Roma cultural heritage, as it is represented or collected through majority public spaces, remains invisible, remains inaccessible, and many times also misrepresented. And at the same time as the Roma, we are claiming a space of leadership and our own voice or voices, not only in this questions of knowledge production and the academia, or whether it's also on the level of policy making or politics, but we are also claiming the right to our own culture and the right to self-representation and self-emancipation also from those stigmas or etiquettes that have been somehow also coded into institutions and institutional practices. And this is also why knowing how the context of Roma community is somehow difficult many times to deal with, because we are a non-territorial nation which doesn't have a state, which doesn't have ministries of education or culture, and where different types of structures, many times quite original and without any other blueprint, step into place to create a space for us to interact across borders, across sub-identities, across languages. And it's around these topics that the project Roma MoMA has been born. Maybe not even a project, because I think it's so much more than that. It's really an initiative and the state of mind, I would say, here at ERIAC, and also hopefully the OFF-Biennale colleagues. Roma MoMA is meant to be somehow a response to the problems that the Roma community are facing, but also it's a response to try to think of what role museums and institutions of culture in general can play. And in the context of COVID pandemic, I think it's even more timely to really reflect on how we can move beyond a very classical approach of museums and cultural institutions in general. So Roma MoMA is a platform that facilitates a discussion across among Roma and non-Roma artists, curators, art historians, scholars, public intellectuals, that tries to envision and discuss the possible forms in which a Roma museum of contemporary culture and art could somehow exist, and if it exists, then how could it exist not only in space but also in time, and how could it be performed? So over the years, together with the OFF-Biennale and many of the colleagues present here, we've been searching for answers and posing very relevant questions about Roma cultural heritage, access to it, the questions of ethics and morals, and also more broader questions of how peripheries speak back to the center. What is a museum? Why do we need it? So this is in this context that we have this discussion today, a very timely one and a very exciting one. So maybe I'll leave it here and hand it over to Hajnalka, who will also say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Anna, so much. Yes, on behalf of OFF-Biennale, I also warmly welcome you on the occasion of this very special panel discussion. Thank you very much for joining us, and of course, thanks to the Central European University Romani Studies program for this cooperation. So OFF-Biennale is not a Roma organization. It is a small independent platform for contemporary art production and discourse that is founded and based here in Budapest in Hungary. Still, I think we share quite some qualities with a lot of Roma cultural organizations. OFF-Biennale was established in response to a certain lack perceived by many in the local cultural scene, namely the lack of an independent and democratic platform for critical thinking and action in the field of contemporary visual art. Well, not only in this field. That would be free from party political agenda, and that would be visible beyond the immediate professional circles. So we started working in 2014, and so far we have presented 3 editions of the Biennale in 2015, in 2017, and the third one that was entitled Inhale, that we closed only yesterday. So this is a great kind of closing event also for our Biennale. Another feature that we might share with many Roma cultural organizations is organizational precarity. We operate without fixed employees, almost only on project money, zero infrastructure, and a very committed team in which volunteering still plays a large role. At the same time, we operate in a field, the field of contemporary art, that for many is equal to privilege, luxury, and power. And indeed, despite its emancipatory calls and content, contemporary art remains far too often the defender of local and global status quo, sometimes against its best intentions. And the problem is structural. So if we want art to really side with the forces of positive change, we have to work on its infrastructure, its institutions, its protocols, its ecosystem. In them, we have to strengthen transparency, accessibility, equality, and sustainability. So this is why we do OFF-Biennale, and this is also why we co-initiated Roma MoMA together with ERIAC. Because by our very modest means, we'd like to contribute to the discourse and action towards the establishment of, as Anna said, a truly relevant 21st century institution for Roma contemporary art. So this is not a Roma question, this is not a Roma problem only. We have to work on it together. And we really hope that our experience in grassroots organizing, in networking, art production, and in performing non-existent institutions can be of some help. So with this, I would like to give the floor for our panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be serving in my in a very humble role of being a moderator for this discussion today. I would just like to also welcome the audience that is following us live on Facebook, and encourage you to also post questions. We have colleagues who are looking at the comment section under the live stream. So if there's any audience out there who has any urgent questions, there will be around a half an hour for the discussion later on with our panelists. So please do feel free to post questions. So yes, today we have 4 absolutely wonderful speakers, each with a fantastic portfolio and a very large space of experience and expertise into the topic of restitution that we'll be engaging with. So I will shortly introduce each of them, and then each one will have a short presentation, and then after we will get into a discussion to reflect on some of the questions of today's discussion. Our first panelist will be Daniel Baker. Daniel Baker is a Romani gypsy artist, researcher, and curator. He has contributed to numerous exhibitions, held various residencies, and curated several commissions. He previously worked as an exhibitor and a consultant for the first and second Roma event at the International Art Exhibition of the Biennale in Venezia, in Paradise Lost and Called the Witness, which took place during the 52nd and 54th art exhibition in Venice. In 2018, he was selected to curate the Roma collateral event of the 58th Biennale di Venezia di Futuroma. And Daniel Baker's work examines the role of art in the enactment of social agency through an eclectic practice that interrogates contemporary art discourse and its social implications via the reconfiguration of elements of the art Roma aesthetics. So, Dr. Baker, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Hello, everyone, and it's great to be here. I'm going to present a PowerPoint, so I will share my screen now. If anything needs addressing, perhaps one of you could let me know and I will make adjustments. So I shall share my screen. Yeah, and here we go. Okay. So I'm going to start with a couple of images of collections that I visited in the course of my art practice and my research into Roma aesthetics and my research into gypsy visual culture, which has been ongoing for the past 20 or so years. So first we have an image here of a private collection, a place called the Romani Life Centre, run by a man called Henry Stanford in Kent in England. And this was the things that he'd basically collected over a period of time. So this is him running kind of this collection himself. There are also a set of buildings and barns which hold various other artifacts, but also vehicles and caravans and trailers in the ground. So it's quite an extensive collection. As you can see, quite chaotic in some ways. And here's another image of an artifact from that collection. And the second picture I'm going to show you is from the state collection of Roma artworks at the Museum of Ethnography in Budapest. This I visited along with Tamer Junghaus and a number of other artists that were exhibiting in the first Roma Pavilion. And we had a tour of the area where they store their Roma collection, which is underground, out of sight of most visitors. So each type of collection has its advantages and its disadvantages, i.e. the private collection and the state collection. For example, private collections are often highly specialized, showing personal enthusiasm for the subject and offering increased accessibility to artifacts and sometimes to their makers. But their precarious nature, along with lack of expertise in conservation, archiving, and documentation, often mean that the collections are unstable both in condition and in permanence. For example, the first collection I showed you by Henry Stanford is no longer in existence. I'm not quite sure what happened to it, but maybe 10 years ago, either the owner had to move or he could no longer accommodate the object. Again, I'm not quite sure what's happened to those objects. So they are kind of, in some ways, lost to us at the present time. State collections have their own set of issues, with conservation of artifacts being high priority in order to maintain the condition of the collection for the future. But often these items are inaccessible to the public, resulting in works of cultural importance being divorced from their origin, thus breaking the connections between the agency of these objects and the communities which have generated them. This kind of appropriation of cultural capital is damaging not only to the connections between artifacts and communities, but also between institutions and the public. So I'm going to show you an image of an artwork from the exhibition Future Roma, which I curated, as Anna said, at the Venice Biennale in 2019, commissioned by ERIAC and supported by the Council of Europe. This work is by the Hungarian Roma artist Laszlo Varga and is titled Study of the Infinite. This intricate drawing places the idea of space and movement at its center. The existential imperative of liberty is taken forward here by offering the possibility of limitless space and infinite potential. These notions of liberation, of freedom, and conversely their restrictions were highlighted through the inclusion of this work in the exhibition, whose actual presence I was not able to secure for display from the Museum of Ethnography in Budapest, an institution which, as I pointed out, holds an extensive collection of important works by Roma artists in its underground storage facility, closed to the public view. In place of Varga's drawing, which, as I said, we couldn't get hold of, 1,000 postcards were printed with the image on one side and information about the exhibition on the other. So the postcards were produced bearing this image in order to distribute and highlight questions regarding the liberation of Roma cultural capital and to act as symbolic of wider Roma emancipatory issues. So the public could take away these postcards and thereby distributing an image of the artwork, but also the sensibility and the agency of the artwork into the wider world, which at present the actual object is unable to do. I also used images of the artwork, the postcard of the artwork on the cover of the Future Roma catalogue. I'm going to show you, let's go back a bit. So exploring the links between individual archives and state collections, between the contemporary and between, I'll start that again. Exploring links between individual archives and state collections, between the traditional and the contemporary, and between domestic and professional artistic practices continues to underpin my work. These hierarchies of practice, collecting, and dissemination can otherwise be thought of as emblematic of the relationship between the marginal and the elite. By looking into the often discriminatory relationship between marginal artistic practices and those that form the center ground, we can find new ways of thinking about relationships between marginalized peoples and mainstream society. So I'm going to show you now some images from two shows that I curated, one in 2007 titled No Gorges and from Future Roma in 2019. These were the flyers for both those exhibitions. So as I say, the No Gorges from 2007, Future Roma from 2019. And I'll show you images from both those exhibitions for the rest of my talk. The object is where artist, subject, and audience meet, and therefore where meaning is shaped and exchanged. Important works generate a variety of meanings, each dependent upon the context in which they are represented. Within this understanding of the workings of art, the potential outcomes are manifold, as are the various roles that art can be seen to perform. At the heart of my interest is a preoccupation with the role of art in affecting change. One of the ways that art can affect change is by showing us the value of that which is overlooked. When we are encouraged to look again at such objects and ideas, we look again at the people that have generated them. In this way, artworks act as an extension of the artist, a proxy, if you will, which in turn acts as an extension of their community. Through re-evaluating such objects, we are motivated to re-evaluate their makers and therefore the culture from which they emerge. This repositioning of artworks, people, and communities is crucial in encouraging us to build futures in our own image, whilst at the same time allowing us to re-examine our collective past. In both No Gorges and Future Roma, each artwork was chosen for its ability to convey meaning rather than the reputation of the artist. The variety of practice moves from traditional domestic activities such as needlework and plant propagation to the digital disciplines of photography, filmmaking, performance, installation, ceramics, painting, drawing, and collage. Each artwork populates the broad cross-section of activity from the domestic to the academic, and from the professionally trained to the self-taught. This unification of domestic artistic practice and contemporary art modes of making allows us to uncover new connections across both fields, whilst offering greater insight into the meanings and implications that they carry for broader ways of thinking about the categorization of objects and their significance. By engaging in creative acts, these artists interrupt expectation to push toward new insight. The main aim is to highlight the potential for Roma artistic practice and its consequent visibility to interrupt prejudice and make way for new narratives. Art and life remain closely linked within Roma society, as is apparent in the way that community and domestic artistic practice has formed the foundation of what is now the international Romani art phenomenon. Without these practices, there would be little to distinguish the new wave of art production by Roma that has emerged over recent decades. Preoccupations with family, community, identity, and the struggle for belonging are common themes within the work. The methods, media, and outcomes may differ, but they remain part of a continuum of innovative artistic practice that reaches back into our past and continues to inform our future. The innovation evident within Roma creativity reflects a pragmatism born of a history of marginalization. Life at the edge of society has shaped Roma's understanding of the value of adaptability and transition, contingent qualities that have continued to inform Roma life to produce a set of values that are routinely played out through visual and sensory markers. Consequently, it strikes me that many art practices by Roma seek to be social rather than socially engaged, arising as they do from an aesthetic imperative born of the material and performative necessities of survival founded in the historic and ongoing existential urgencies of the Roma experience. This alternative perspective points to a rethinking of the role of artistic practice, one that conceives art as embedded within the social rather than demanding that the social be engaged with art. This way of thinking questions the widespread separation between everyday life and art, thereby challenging established hegemonies of artistic practice to position us all as artists and equally none of us. A way of thinking which draws sharp focus to the ways in which much of our historic artistic output as a community remains inaccessible to us. Resistance remains a recurring element across Roma art practice and the Roma aesthetic, producing artworks that operate as arbiters of visibility, recognition, and equality. Many of the works combine visual and material signifiers to produce resistant objects, which at once occupy the realms of the domestic, the communal, and the political. This codependence between the social and the artistic is where the boundaries between life and art disappear, to show a direct relationship between cultural visibility and social agency for Roma. By interrupting the expectation of the viewer, these and objects like them resist preconception and challenge the prejudgment that often follows. They enact resistance not through overt political acts, but through subtler and perhaps more compelling means. These creative processes facilitate the interrogation and reinterpretation of experience. The resulting outcomes can be pivotal in promoting dialogue across diverse groups, but the impact of those outcomes is dependent upon the differing frameworks in which they are experienced. Museums now emulate elements of the Roma experience through initiatives such as community outreach and participation, both of which echo the kind of community involvement which has long been part of Roman artistic practice. Just as these institutions are now looking to minority groups for communities and communities for fresh approaches to collecting and dissemination, so we as Roma need to influence these establishments in a meaningful and impactful way to highlight the equality, rather the inequality, evidenced by the widespread excision of Roma histories from state narratives, and in so doing, enact the potential for such histories to be challenged and to be reset. Thank you very much. So I'll end my presentation there.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you so much also for very engaging presentation that helps to illustrate your points very well. So thank you for this contribution.
Okay.
Next up, we have Anna-Luisa Sass, who is a sociologist currently teaching at Budapest Corvinus University. Her PhD thesis, Memory Emancipated, explored the memory of the Nazi genocide of the Roma. And her research interests are contemporary art and memory politics. She's also the project manager of the OFF-Biennale Budapest Roma MoMA section. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. And hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I actually feel like I have more to learn here than to share with you, but I'm trying to do my best. I also have to mention my other affiliation as well, which is that I'm a co-curator of a project within Roma MoMA called Collectively Carried Out, which focuses on Tamás Péli's painting monumental panel titled Birth. And this is the case study which I'm going to use for this presentation. And the other curators whom I should mention, because they play a very important part in this presentation as well as in the whole work, are Eszter György and Teri Szűcs. So we do this work together. I think I need to share my screen, and I'm as if COVID didn't happen. I'm so bad. Can you see? Is it up? Okay. So I would like to start with recalling a discussion which I had recently with Teri Szűcs about the idea or the concept of the Roma Museum and how this utopian concept has been shifting towards much more real manifestation of space and place, and how we are talking about the realization of a Roma Museum instead of an utopia. And then I kept thinking about this idea of utopia and found this, accidentally I came across this quotation from Slavoj Žižek, which I would like to share with you, also we can read together, that's easier. And I think it's very accurate and topical, and also helps us, or actually helps me understand the importance of the Roma Museum. So think about the strangeness of today's situation. 30, 40 years ago, we were still debating about what the future will be, communist, fascist, capitalist, whatever. Today, nobody even debates these issues. We all silently accept that global capitalism is here to stay. On the other hand, we are obsessed with cosmic catastrophes. The whole life on Earth is disintegrating because of some virus, because of an asteroid hitting the Earth, and so on. So the paradox is that it is much easier to imagine the end of all life on Earth than a much more modest radical change in capitalism, which means that we should reinvent utopia. But in what sense? There are two false meanings of utopia. One is the old notion of imagining an ideal society, which we know will never be realized. The other is that capitalist utopia, in the sense of new and new perverse desires that you are not only allowed, but even solicited to realize. The true utopia is when the situation is so without issue, without a way to resolve it within the coordinates of the possible, that out of the pure urge of survival, you have to invent a new space. Utopia is not a kind of free imagination. Utopia is a matter of innermost urgency. You are forced to imagine it as the only way out. And this is what we need today. And I think this is what we need today also in the context of the Roma Museum. So utopia stems from this urgency, this numbness of the momentum to take responsibility. Utopia is not just a work of imagination, but also the manifestation of that work. So there was this Congolese activist in the news in the past few months. You might have heard about him. His name is Emery Mazulu Diabanza, who was arrested for taking a ceremonial ivory spear from its display from the Museum of African, Oceanic, and Native American Arts in Marseille in July 2020. Then in September, he visited Africa Museum in the Netherlands and picked up a Congolese statue. In October, he attempted to take funeral stuff from France, from a museum in France, which he even live streamed. So the point was not to do an actual robbery, but to raise attention. So in October, he attempted to take it. He was arrested, and there was a ruling against the Abanza shortly after the French National Assembly approved the landmark repatriation of 27 artifacts back to Benin and Senegal by 2021. The Abanza at that moment said that it's an insult. It is African countries who should decide the timings of the restitution. And this is my first point, which I would like to raise or make, that this to emphasize timing. The above mentioned innermost urgency has to come from all those communities and nations which were looted and whose artifacts, cultural heritage was taken away. The art industry has to accommodate itself to this need, not only on the level of discussion and discourses, but because those can sometimes be only lip service, but also on the level of taking action. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the exhibition we are working now on, and also share with you the lessons we learned throughout the work of these 2 years, and how these lessons fit in the discourse of decolonization and restitution. Before I start with, I would like to just show you one of the portraits of Tamás Péli, who died in 1994, and so his painting is the focus, or is the origo, or the center point of our work. He was a Roma, Hungarian, European artist, and he painted in 1983 the monumental panel titled Birth. So also there is a quotation from Péli, which I think guides us through this work and provides all the guidelines for how it and the artworks in general shall be treated right after they are born and they are becoming part of the society. Let me share this quotation with you. So the closer I got to finishing the painting, to the day of its unveiling, the more intense the contractions became. I felt what a woman in labor feels, pain and joy. I felt what a woman feels who gives birth to her child and then has to abandon them. It was taken from me. It was not mine anymore. I had to let it go. After I painted it, the work had to grow up. The world which receives the work has to nurture it, care for it, pay attention to it, and talk about it. This painting, this child has to be enrolled into university. When we separated, I believed that I was handing it over to carers. I'm thinking of society who would look after it. That small community which owns this painting are mature enough for this role. I'm talking about the City of Children in Tiszadob. They have the ability to protect and love it. They are aware of its meanings. Now I'm showing you the whole panel. That's Birth. A few words about the context of Birth. So this is painted in fiberboard. It is nearly 41 square meters, completed in 1973 by Tamás Péli and his students. Birth was installed on the wall of the refectory of the children's home in the mansion at Tiszadob, also known as the City of Children. That's the eastern part of Hungary. When the mansion was turned into a hotel in 2011, the monumental panel was removed and hauled in 4 pieces to a museum in Nyíregyháza. It was stored in the museum's corridor, covered, safe, but unseen. Realized as a collaboration between OFF-Biennale, ERIAC, and the Budapest History Museum, the purpose of this exhibition, which is going to be open on the 8th of June, actually, is entitled Collectively Carried Out, is more than rendering the painting visible. The goal is to introduce the painting into the collective public space, generated by discussions and interpretations. Péli's Birth panel arranges the figures of several grand narratives into a single composition. The centerpiece is an imagined, invented Roma creation myth, surrounded on the one hand by episodes recounted through symbolic figures of Hungarian Roma history, and on the other hand by figures of the new Genesis the emerging Hungarian Roma intelligentsia. In this triple birth, a people, a historical narrative, and through its creators, a culture is brought to life. And the point of intersection, that a manifestation of this triple genesis is Péli's gigantic piece. Birth is also a collective act in which the Hungarian historical narrative, a community in its broadest sense, is created and reborn. Roma and Hungarian historical narratives interweave while they assume one another. Hence this work, Birth, with all its various layers and morals, will be collectively carried out. I would like to share with you some other photos. So this is the momentum when the panel was removed from the orphanage in Tiszadób and was taken to a museum corridor. So you can see that it was made out of 4 huge panels, sorry. And then that's the day when basically not only these 4 panels arrived to Budapest, to the Budapest History Museum, but also they were unwrapped, uncovered. And basically these panels now are surrounded or basically introduced to those who do the restoration work. It's not a complete restoration, only a cleaning of the 4 panels before they are installed in this space, which you can see. There will be an installation built around the panel. And that's one of those sacred moments when a person who does the restoration is focusing on one of the panels, one of the parts of the panel, and doing the restoration work. So the lessons we learned, I would like to share with you. So restitution or decolonization is important because access to cultural artifacts has to be provided and granted for people, especially for the Roma communities. So I'm talking about the Hungarian context, but between 1979 and 2005, more than 4,000 artworks of this community were brought by 7 collections in the country, brought once Tímea Junghaus. Yet to date, there is not a single permanent exhibition where Roma art could be accessed, researched, or viewed. Recently, there are some new and irreplaceable losses. For instance, the closure of the Roma Parliament in 2016, which had a huge collection of Roma art. This collection is now stored under horrible conditions in the cellar of the Roma Parliament. Also, by contrast, the collections of the Hungarian National Roma Self-Government and the Budapest Roma Cultural and Educational Center digitized their collections, but they are not accessible to the public. The closing of the Gallery 8, which Angela mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, is also very regrettable. Since 2018, there is no contemporary Roma art space in Budapest. And those artists who are willing to rewrite artistic traditions in a subversive manner are rather making exhibitions abroad. And my second point is that these artifacts need to be recontextualized, reinterpreted. Until the second half of the 20th century, the representation of the Roma was the exclusive monopoly of non-Roma artists. And as a consequence, Roma music was labeled as folk music. Roma art was labeled as folk art, mostly interpreted by ethnographers. So Roma artifacts, cultural treasures, were interpreted as being not works of individual authors, but rather as collective facts of nature, which only gain significance by the work of the collector or the folklorist. This is the context that shall be deconstructed. So the steps we make during this exhibition is that, on the one hand, this whole exhibition is part of the OFF-Biennale, which is a contemporary art event. Also, we invited art historians to reinterpret, to retextualize, to create texts from an art historian point of view, put these put this painting into a framework which is interpreted by art historians and not by ethnographers. The exhibition venue will be in the Budapest History Museum, which is not an ethnography museum, neither an art museum, but a museum which offers several possibilities for several narratives, such as a historical narrative, a sociological narrative, an art historian's narrative. So these narratives can enrich the understandings, the layers of this painting. And finally, in terms of the recontextualization, we organize roundtable discussions in which we would like to explore the various interpretations and understandings of this painting. My third point is that restitution should focus on visual art, because this is the medium that is in the heart of the decolonial struggle. It is inherently political. Roma visual art is a site for articulating resistance and also a creative praxis against erasure and for self-representation. My fourth point is the sense of collectivity, or the strengthening of the collectivity. So this whole restitution process of decolonization should happen in a collective way. It is both a Hungarian and a Roma responsibility, and birth teaches us to think in a collective way. So Hungarian and Roma narratives assume each other, support one another, and there is a mutual responsibility, as I said, to take care of this panel, not only this panel, but to take care of all the cultural heritage. And my last point is the return of these objects, return to the community. What we wish to do throughout this exhibition to find a final placement of this panel, basically to take it out forever from the museum's corridor and give it back to those who are concerned, let them be a community or an institution such as like the Gandhi High School, or there are many options. So there is a lot at stake, because there are other, in some ways, more powerful actors who wish to claim Peli's panel and Peli's legacy as their own concern, and wish to make decisions in the name of Roma, but without the Roma. So it is time for restitution, and we hope it might begin with the monumental panel of Peli. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna, for your excellent presentation, and also thank you for bringing in this really extraordinary example of birth and the politics behind it, because I think it's also very important to talk about that. Thank you so much. So then we have, as our next speaker, we have Maria Lynn. Maria Lynn, who is a curator, a critic, and an educator. She was the director of Stockholm's Tensta konsthall between 2018 and 2018, and the artistic director of the 11th Gwangju Biennale, the director of the graduate program, Center for Curatorial Studies at the Bard College, and director of IASPIS in Stockholm between 2005 and 2007. In 2020, she was appointed as the Counselor of Culture at the Embassy of Sweden in Moscow, where she's currently based. Maria, thank you so much for joining us in between so many different activities and responsibilities. Yes, we're very happy to have you here with us. So the floor is yours. You are muted, Maria. If you could still try to unmute your mic, please.
Unmute, and let me see if I can share my screen here with you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my screen?
I think it's still loading.
Okay. Tell me when you can see my screen.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, I can say I'm always honored to be invited to contribute to the events that ERIAC is involved with. And I would like to talk about a project that ERIAC knows very well, and also those of you who were hanging out at and around Gallery 8 in Budapest some 6-7 years ago. And it's connected to the literary legacy of the Roma Swedish writer and activist Katarina Taikon. Her series of children's books, autobiographical, centering around the figure of Katitzi. Can you see the screen now?
Unfortunately, we cannot. I'm really sorry, Maria.
Let me see. Maybe I should change the network sometimes this time of day. I'm talking to you from Moscow, and this time of day, there is sometimes a bit of an issue with the connection. So I'm so sorry. Maybe, anyway, it's better if Nanette jumps in, and I will try and make my connection a bit better.
Okay.
Or maybe just, yeah, it's here.
Oh, now we can see it. Yes, excellent. It loaded.
Good. So, as a bit of background, in 1969, the first Katitzi book was published in Swedish, and you can see it on the left on this image. Autobiographical for children, written by Katarina Taikon. It was immediately well received, and a number of subsequent books followed. Now here in Moscow, we have taken over the exhibition that was at Gallery 8 and also at ERIAC in Berlin, and showing it in Moscow, accompanied with the first translation into Russian of the first Katitzi book, which you can here see on the right-hand side. And Katarina Taikon, who was born in 1932 and passed away in 1995, can be called one of the best kept secrets of Sweden so far, a figure of big importance in the post-war period, thanks to her writing and thanks to her activism on behalf of the Roma community in Sweden. She was a brilliant figure who really brought many discussions on the table, fighting for housing for the Roma, fighting for schooling, which still at the beginning of the 60s in Sweden was not granted. In a way, a big blind spot in the social welfare state, which thought of itself as being very democratic and equal. She was also one of the people who pioneered discussing the Roma Holocaust in the context of Sweden. Eventually, she turned to writing children's books, somewhat disappointed with the result of her activism. And those 13 autobiographical books were extremely successful. This we can learn in the 2012 biography about Katarina Taikon, written by Laven Moqtadi, who is a journalist and a writer who not only researched Katarina Taikon's life, but also the history of the Roma in Sweden, as well as the particular activist legacy and the political context of Sweden in the 60s, in which Katarina Taikon was so engaged. This book has now also been translated into Russian, and those of you who prefer reading English, here is the English translation, both of the first Katitzi book and of the biography, which was published in conjunction with the exhibition at ERIAC that was in 2019 in the end. So the exhibition here in Moscow is staged at the Central Children's Library, which is the biggest library in the world for children when it comes to size. And at the heart of the library, we have an exhibition where we look at the literary character of Katitzi. We follow her. Here is just a slide of the daughter of Katarina Taikon, Angelica Ström, who joined us on Zoom for the opening. We had planned a big program for her in Moscow, but due to the pandemic, she could not arrive. But it was wonderful to have her with us in this form anyway. So looking at Katitzi is very much about celebrating a figure, a literary figure, as well as the woman behind it, and thinking about that this was not only something that raised consciousness in relation to Roma issue, which is in and of itself extremely important. It was also pioneering a new genre of children's literature, a more realistic way of writing children's books, and also moving therefore away from the more idealistic and sweet representations of the lives of children from before. In the exhibition, we have the original drawings by Björn Hedlund, an artist with whom Katarina Taikon worked very closely. These are from the first book, and they tell the story of how Katarina was given away by her father when she was just a couple of years old, after her mother passed away when she was around 1 year old. She lived in a foster home and eventually in an orphanage in the north of Sweden. So we follow her life at the orphanage until the point when her father, Johan or Ishvan Taikon, decides to take her back to the family, and she can live with her 3 older siblings, Rosa, whom some of you probably know as the silversmith Rosa Taikon, Paul and Lena. And we follow the life of the family as they travel around in the north of Sweden. They were not allowed to live for longer than 3 months in one place. And they earned a living through having a fun fair, primarily, where the different family members joined in to play in an orchestra, for example. The return to the family is accompanied by these dynamic illustrations where you can follow the life of the family, including depicting interiors of the tents, etc. Here we have a selection of the books. The last one published in 1982, and they were a tremendous success in Sweden. New editions were regularly printed. They were borrowed thousands of times at public libraries. And my generation and several after my generation really grew up with Katitzi by our side. And the genius thing with the books is that Katitzi grows slightly older for every book, just as we, as readers, were growing older. And the last book differs from the previous 12 in terms of the cover. Here we have a photograph of young Katarina Taikon. The final book ends when she's 16 years old, and she takes matter into her own hands in the sense of choosing her own life. She had been married off at the age of 14. She ran away and then actually found herself a job and started a more self-determined life. So this is the conclusion of the series. Just some of the original covers for the books. And as a sign of this tremendous success, we included the comic books that were developed based on the 13 books. So it was that popular that a commercial publishing company found it relevant to even make a copy. And translations. Soon after the first book was published, the first translations came into the other Nordic languages, eventually into German and French and Italian. And then after the expansion of the European Union in the early 2000s, the first book was translated into Slovak, into Romanian, etc., countries with large Roma communities, as you very well know. And on the right, the first Romani translation made by Katarina Taikon's relative Hans Kaldaras, which actually also exists as an audiobook. And Swedish television made a series based on the book for children, which also was edited to function as a feature film in the cinemas. And it was shown as such in the early 80s. So with this, I'm just going to go back to this one. So with this, I want to underline that we have artifacts for sure in museums, but we also have less material legacies like literature. And the Katitzi series of books is a unique contribution to the history of Swedish literature and beyond. And I think it's only now that it's possible to appreciate the entirety and the impact of what Katarina Taikon did, literarily speaking, in addition to her very important contribution to the life of Roma through her policy work. One could actually say that without her work, which she did with friends and not least her sister Rosa, contributed to the fact that in the year 2000, the Roma were proclaimed one of 5 national minorities in Sweden. And I would very much like to agree with the previous speaker in the sense that it's the timing issue which can be played to our advantage here. I would propose that we start with some of the great ideas that have been proposed very soon with Roma MoMA, which is a dear project to me, with the dispersed institution, let's say. Let's begin very soon. It's better to start in one place, maybe small, and at the same time think and discuss what we're doing instead of waiting and thinking and discussing and then starting. I believe very much in this parallel situation of doing and thinking at the same time. And I would propose that one interesting route could be to actually lobby the national museums of Sweden, as well as the Ministry of Culture and the Council of Culture, the state authorities funding culture and being responsible for museums, to argue that it is about time for this national minority to be properly represented in national museums, just like the Sami minority, which has its own section, for instance, at the big ethnographic museum called the Nordic Museum in Stockholm. So I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, so much. I really always enjoy listening about Kaititsi because I think it's no shame to say that actually I was discovering Kaititsi thanks to you, because unfortunately it was not as popular and as well known in my country as I was growing up. So this is really truly fantastic, and thank you for also pointing to us the interconnectedness between the arts, but also the politics and ultimately social justice. And I think that our discussion is very much embedded in exactly this frame. Our last speaker today is Annette Snob. We have a great pleasure of having you here with us, Nanette. I wanted to make sure you can hear us, and you hear, yes, fantastic. So let me just briefly introduce Nanette to you. She is a Dutch anthropologist and a curator since January 2019. She is the director of the Ruitenstrauch Joost Museum Kultur en der Welt, the ethnological collection in Cologne, Germany. Prior to that, she was working since 2016 as the head of various ethnographic museums in Germany, after being curator at the Quai Branly Museum for a long period of time. In her exhibitions, she disrupts the way ethnographic collections are presented, not hesitating to propose themes that challenge established knowledge associated to the conception of projects for new audiences, alternative scene, migrants, artists, and so forth. She also taught African art history and curated international exhibitions. In addition, Annette Snob actively participates in contemporary debates on the restitution of museal collections acquired during colonization in Germany and in France. Nanette, thank you really so much for joining us. I think this whole discussion that we've had here really builds actually towards this moment in the debate, where we really need to reflect on how this specific case of Roma is actually embedded in a broader struggle for not only racial justice, but also in the broader struggle of decolonization. And I wonder whether you could maybe provide us with a brief overview of the restitution debates and the processes concerning restitution of artifacts and human remains from Global South, which, as we all know, tend to be rather contentious and often quite heated discussions. And you have worked so much in this field. Would you maybe walk us a little bit through this little situation where we are today?
Okay, Anna, thank you very much for your introduction. I will try to make a short overview. At first, I would also like to say that actually we have an exhibition, Resist, the Art of Resistance, at the Rauschenschlag-Joost Museum in Cologne. This is an exhibition about 500 years of anti-colonial resistance, and in this context, we are now collaborating together, and with ERIAC and Timea Junghaus curated an autonomous space inside this exhibition, which is actually about anti-colonial resistance in the Global South. But we thought it was very interesting to make, to make comparisons with resistance from Roma communities here in Europe. So that's why we have this contact. So let's try to make a short overview of the debates about ethnological collections. As Anna already said, I'm a Dutch curator, and I started my career in Paris in 1995. At first at the Museum of Mankind, a typical ethnological museum. And then I worked for this very new national museum, which is actually the counterpart of the Humboldt Forum, let's say, with the same debates and the same polemics, but only this museum has been inaugurated in 2006. So what was going on in the 90s? Because I have the feeling it's important to understand the 90s in order to understand what's happening now. And perhaps also this could give some keys to the debates of restitution, of Roma visual art, Roma archives, and also Roma ancestral remains, which are in museums throughout Europe. So in the 90s, when I started as a young curator, there started really the first serious critique on ethnological museums. But where is the difference between the 90s and today? There was no critique on the right, on self-presentation. And the debate was mainly held by white museum curators and communities, even the diaspora, for example, the African diaspora in Europe, or African museums were absolutely not included. I don't say that now they are very included in the current debate, but it is a little bit more than comparing to the 90s, or yes, let's say between 2000 and 2015. So we spoke a lot about colonial history, but also about the absence of history in ethnographic museums. So here we spoke about the idea of the ethnographic present, that there is no idea of time and space in ethnographic museums. So, so yes, this were in the 90s. So at the same time in Europe, it was, well, you had this debate, but at the same time in other countries, it was much more interesting. And I would say, I would refer to the debates in North America, in Canada, in Australia, and in, for example, New Zealand, where communities are on the soil of the colonizers. So here you had the first debates in the 90s about the repatriation of ancestral remains and the founding of number of community museums, and even step by step more pressure on, let's say, white ethnographic museums. So let's mention, for example, the Te Papa, T-E-P-A-P-A, Te Papa Museum in Wellington in New Zealand, was founded in 1998. And here what is very interesting, that this was for the first time that they rebuilt actually the museum, but they rebuilt also the staff. So the staff was with a lot of representatives of the Maori, the local community in New Zealand. But which was also very interesting, it was not only the new idea of a museum, but a huge department was in charge of the restitution, for example, of ancestral remains and of artifacts. So I think, so the idea of the museum and this department, this was thought together. And that's why the Maori community organized such a lot of repatriations, massive repatriations until now, and really it was also a diverse staff. So this is something new in the history of the ethnographic museum landscape, this Te Papa Museum in Wellington. You also have the American Indian Museum in the Smithsonian American Indian Museum. This has been reopened in 2004. Also, the same time, a new museum with a new staff, with a real participation of indigenous communities, but also here, one of the very important topics of the National Museum of the American Indian was also here, the repatriation of ancestral remains or sacred objects. That's why there is one act which is very important in the history of restitution. That is the NECPRA. That is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And this act gave the power to indigenous communities to reclaim for restitution, to use sacred objects, but it was also, it obliged North American museums to give access to local communities and to provide a database of American Indian artifacts and ancestral remains. And this act, this NECPRA Act, is still very important and had an impact also on European museums, and I come back on later. So, and then last but not least, because you see here the difference between, for example, the American Indian Museum and for example, which has been founded or rethought in 2004, there is a very large difference with another museum in North America. That is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, what has been inaugurated in 2016. Here, it's a little bit different. Also a database, also the idea of centralizing a unit for African American history. And at the same time, and this is the difference with the National Museum of the American Indian, which has been opened 10 years earlier, that for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, this has been thought for the Black American communities, as the National Museum of the American Indian Museum has been thought and structured for white Americans and then for the American Indians. So here you see a paradigm shift since, let's say, since 2015. So this is for us, for European museums, for me as a director, very, very important steps in the battle for self-determination, self-presentation, and restitution, which is part of this struggle. And as a director, I'm just here. My function as museum director is just a door opener, a kind of facilitator. So I try to open the doors. So let's come back to what's happening now, because we speak today about restitution, and I heard we spoke about, for example, the activist, Diabanga, which came in the Quai Branly Museum in Paris, and then in the Netherlands, and now with the Humboldt Forum, the restitution of the Benin bronzes. And here you see actually that since 2015, there is such a lot of pressure of local communities, of diasporic communities and post-colonial groups throughout Europe, and alliances between those different groups, that museums, if I'm very frank, I don't think that museum directors really change their mind, but I think there is such a lot of pressure. They are obliged to open their doors, and they have to start restitution and to reinvent the idea of ownership. So this is, for example, in Germany, you had then these big discussions with the French president, Macron, who invited Felwine Sarr, the Senegalese intellectual. I start with Felwine Sarr because every time in Europe we speak at first about the French historian Bénédicte Savoy, but the role of Felwine Sarr, Felwine Sarr was very, very important. So that's why I speak at first about Felwine Sarr, and Bénédicte Savoy wrote this very, very important report about the necessity of restitution of African artifacts from French collections. And why do I speak about that? Because it has, of course, an impact in France, but it has even a huger impact in German museums. Because after that, there became a kind of competition between European countries who is the best in decolonizing its museums. So there is a kind of competition at the moment. I would say you have to use this in order to find solutions for restitution. So after Macron, you had also this debate in Germany with the pressure of groups, let's say the Berlin Postcolonial, or the group No Humboldt. So and this led to this big pressure of communities every day in all the cities was actually that it obliged museums, but also German politics, French politics, but also in the Netherlands, to make concrete steps in restitution. And then you see at the same time, when you have these debates on the European soil, you have other new museums on the African continent, much stronger networks on the African continent. So I just give some examples. For example, in Senegal, a new museum about Black civilization, which is a very important museum, which is of course from the French-speaking African countries. You have to imagine that in Africa, because of linguistics, perhaps this could be interesting for you, I have no idea, but which is very interesting, that there are really different groups in Africa between the French, the English, the Portuguese and the Spanish-speaking countries. And there is, the connection between those countries is quite complicated, but now also this is improving. So you have at the moment now this new Edo Museum of West African Art in Nigeria. That's why Germany is willing to restitute its Benin bronzes from the Benin Kingdom in Nigeria in 2022. And this is a real revolution in the debates of restitution, because the Benin bronzes are, let's say, the Rembrandts, the Velasquez from Ethnographic Museum, the most expensive artworks which are held in ethnographic museums. So here also a new museum, so also strong networks and strong boards from the Nigeria. Ghana, same thing, also local initiatives, this very important person, women, activist, intellectual, which is, her name is Nana Ofriata Ajim, and she had this Ghana pavilion in the last Venice Biennale, and she created the Institute of Arts and Knowledge in Ghana, and also she is a very strong voice. She, for example, she makes this project about the mobile museum. And then last museum, that is the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Arts Africa, the MOCA in Cape Town, which is also led by a women director, which is very interesting. All those women on the African continent who are fighting for restitution. And then the very last project, which has a link with us, because on Friday we opened here a last small exhibition, which is the exhibition calls Invisible Inventories. And this is a project, the initiative comes from Kenyan artists, the Nest Collective, and they created a huge database. They created it, so there is a small difference, but you know this much better. But I have the feeling there is a difference with the Roma archive, because the initiative came from Kenyan artists, and they make a very systematic database of more than 32,000 artifacts from Kenya in European and North American museums, with the help of the Goethe Institute and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And parallel to this database, they asked me, for example, in another museum in Frankfurt, if we were willing to host an exhibition. So they made an exhibition about this database and the idea of access, epistemic violence, and so on. And I have the feeling that this invisible IIP project, that's the name, could be very interesting and inspiring for you, because I have the feeling this was a very good, yeah, how can I say, kind of trickster project in order to make your database. Institutions are supporting, but you remain master of your own database, and then you know everything, and you can make your own museum or your own exhibition, hosted at first by an institution, but this all has been made with the purpose to ask for restitution. So this is what I wanted to say, the overview, and what's happening now in the debates, and perhaps what could help in for your own restitution.
Thank you, Nanette. I mean, you've been very humble and also saying what important role you've actually played in these, in bringing these discourses, and also very specific solutions in terms of practice, you know, on an institutional level, and also in the context of the Benin Bronze's return, which is definitely a very important development also for us. I would invite also the other panelists who are here to also, if you are still here with us, to turn on your cameras. I wanted to direct a few questions to build on what Nanette said. So first, Nanette, I would just like to ask you, because of course, there needs to be an unraveling alliance building across Roma and the other peripheries. And the Global South, as decolonized, are for us a paradigmatic communities, really, because we also tend to see ourselves as a colonialized people of Europe. I wonder if you could maybe, based on your experience, also tell us a little bit, how do you see commonalities and differences between the cases of the Global South, the diverse communities you mentioned, and the case of Roma? And also, if you were to imagine kickstarting a campaign of restitution in the Roma context, do you have any tricks and tips for us that we should also keep in mind?
Yeah, I can say just so spontaneously. And we had before this small conversation, and then you said also about for the Roma, there is this trans-territorial aspect and the diversity. And I'm not so sure, but really this is perhaps I'm not right. I have the feeling, I don't know if, for example, when we speak about the restitution of African artworks, of ancestral remains, that there is a unity. You have a lot of diversity in the African continent. I spoke already about linguistics, politics, historical background, specificities, and at the same time, you also have the African diaspora in Europe, which is completely different, with different wishes and so on. So actually, I see more communalities as differences, but here, this is up to you to continue the discussion. We also, Anna spoke about also the Sami in Norway, and also the next Norwegian pavilion will be a Sami pavilion. So you see here also inside Europe, the debate is starting. So it's the same thing as we have in our exhibition now, the Art of Resistance, which is actually about the Global South. We see actually so much communalities, which really, this was a wonderful cooperation with Timea. So I think actually, I would say, I think you must take more accent on the communalities as on the differences. But I think it's the perfect moment to use the debate which is going on now in order to speak about restitution and really to make a European and I would say, I have the feeling that the project of the Invisible Inventories project from Kenya, which can be improved. There are a lot of things which were difficult and perhaps Well, but I cannot say that on the screen. I can speak more freely, but I think this was very interesting because it was an initiative of Kenyan artists which really wanted to stay autonomous, and they made this really pragmatic database. The Roma archive database is very large. It's not the Invisible Inventory Project database is really just to locate every single artifact or a visual artwork or whatever, which is in European museums. And as the fact that it was funded by the Goethe Institute, that, for example, my museum was supporting it, it was difficult for other museums to say, no, we won't give this access. And I think this is the most crucial thing, and then starting from a database immediately to make small steps, which was already pointed out, and to occupy spaces also in existing museums, I would say. And then the Roma MoMA parallel, but I think you really have to also to enter even art museums, but also ethnographic museums, even if it hurts, as Timea said, that it was the Museum of the Devil, which she said for a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you, Nanette. I would like to also bring in here Maria, Anna, and Daniel. I think it's really important as you were together also working in the Roma MoMA as a space also for us to imagine the future. I wonder, of course, restitution is very, it requires, so to speak, also a structure of institutions and spaces to which the restitution can actually arrive to. We've been discussing many different formats or different possibilities, but I would like to ask you about the reflection of how does the lack of space which is owned by Roma, which is led by Roma, which is really has a complete control over the narrative as well. How does this reflect in the restitution process, if we imagine it so in the context of Roma culture, and whether such a space should actually somehow be a first step in the agenda for us to start? Daniel, would you like to go first?
Okay, thank you, Anna. I wonder if something like a time-limited period where we invite museums around the world to give us their inventory of Roma artifacts with their collection, something like a year of the Roma Museum, which would in effect be a Roma audit, an audit of Roma artifacts within a museum, as I say, around the world, around Europe. And in a way that would hopefully encourage museums to become public about what they have, and also if they don't have anything, also be public about that. So in that way, we could maybe inhabit the museums that currently have the work, rather than finding a space of our own, which I think is important. But meanwhile, if we, in a way, encourage or /shame, shame's the wrong word, but if we have this initiative, which is with great fanfare, saying it's about celebrating Roma experience and Roma culture, and we approach each museum and say, could you just tell us what you have? Because that will add to our, sense of our cultural capital, and they will be part of that if they have materials that they are willing to kind of record for us and to share with us in a simple list. That in a way would locate these objects in their museum, and then in some ways the onus is on them to show us the works themselves. So I think it could be seen as a kind of parasitic approach, but if all our artifacts are with other people, we need to find out where they are, get us to show them in a very celebratory way, in a sharing way. So you're part of our heritage now. We can celebrate your ownership of these objects. Let's elevate them. So I think maybe that's a way of tackling the problem of space, but also ticking a few other boxes as well of getting people to kind of come clean about what they've got. And also, if they haven't got anything, that's another interesting point. So maybe they can make room for some of our stuff.
Thank you, Daniel. I would like to just to say that if it's okay with you, my dear panelists, would it be okay if we extend until 6:10 so that we can still get your comments to this very interesting discussion? So Maria, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to underline the importance of negotiating space soon, as you say, Daniel, in existing institutions. I am quite convinced that it is possible, and this is, of course, what Roma MoMA partly is about, that we could start by collaborating with, let's say, 5 to 7 institutions within Europe. And I think within a year, we would have one room in each of those museums where things can start happening, whether it's directly connected to retribution or not. It can also be contemporary artists dealing with the question of retribution, so that we in different ways actually massage the topic, and we do it simultaneously on several fronts. So I am repeating myself, but I would say let's start now.
Thank you, Maria. Anna. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that 2 years ago, I was on the side of saying that there is no need for a separate space, but you can only change the policies of museums and change the narratives and the stuff and make them more inclusive, and that would be enough. But now I'm more in the line with creating a new space. I think I've learned from Nanette's presentation that basically all restitution basically ends with a space. It needs a space, a separate and autonomous space, as we can see in the African cases, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'm rather supporting the idea of having a space for them. I don't know where, because I'm aware that Roma are transnational, non-territorial, so I have no idea where, but I like this idea of the mobile museum. I haven't heard about it, Nanette, but I'm gonna look it up. So I can imagine something like a fixed storage place for the collection with a fixed space, and then there is this traveling museum which somehow operates in Europe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I think that from your comments, actually, it seems that it's not necessarily an either or, but rather a question of let's do it all. And I think that such an agenda actually makes a perfect sense, and that sounds like a perfect thing. We still have 4 minutes, and there has been a number of questions that are still here in the chat. But I was wondering if you don't mind to ask one question that kind of reverses the optic, because we talked a lot about how we are actually looking into all these restitution practices from other countries and other communities as well, because we see that in many senses there have been so much more advanced. In these debates, there's also the question of power, of history of nations, and all of those have, I mean, very different weight when we negotiate with institutions, and we try to kind of undo the wrongs of the past. But I wonder, in the case of Roma, which is so atypical and so unprecedented, I would say, are there things that, because of the fact that we are not limited by state institutions, that we don't have one state particularly, and we're not even limited to one continent only, but our presence is rather global, is there an opportunity in the Roma coming up front with our process of restitution, which may kind of be an avant-garde, or maybe a quite more liberating experience, just because of the fact that we're working from different space. So I wonder if is there an opportunity for the societies at large, the global society, and also other minority struggles, in putting the case of restitution towards Roma as this kind of globalized, non-territorial and very diverse community. Is there an opportunity that we could kind of use as a bait for other institutions or countries to really embrace this initiative?
I want to say absolutely. It's a great moment, and adding also that we can learn from how other institutions have been initiated, how they were born. There is, it's quite rare that an institution is coming about fully fledged. It often starts with a small initiative. You know, a film screening program over several years led to the Moderna Museet, the Modern Museum in Stockholm in 1958. MoMA in New York, it was a really limited space at the beginning in the 20s until, you know, it steadily grew. So I believe so much in that. And I would just like to add one more thing now when all of you are here, and that is a reminder that we can also think about the Roma as something united Europe and Russia at a time when we sometimes struggle to find common denominators considering the development. But this is actually a very concrete and very important unifying thread. So I would like to encourage all of you to keep that in mind. And I would be more than happy during the 3 years I'm here to facilitate this.
Thank you, Maria. Nanette, what do you think? You're muted.
Could you please briefly repeat your question? Sorry.
What is the question was really kind of brainstorming with you out loud, which was what is the opportunity that the case of decolonizing Roma brings if we are not, if we could see this as an opportunity through the diversity, the national character of our communities, the global character of our community diaspora. Is there an opportunity for others in putting this case forward?
Yeah, I pointed it already out. That's why I really think that you have to take this moment and this very moment, this historic very moment in time. And that's because the public opinion is very open for it. There is such a lot of project that I think you have to take this, and perhaps and as also Anna pointed out before, that she said, yeah, perhaps the mobile museum. But I think this idea of the database, I really think this is crucial. And the idea of creating a Roma MoMA and at the same time enter existing institutions in order to make aware also the public opinion of the importance of a Roma MoMA museum.
Daniel, Anna, do you have any final comments or additions to this discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to shortly refer to one of the comments made by Chikos Marina and also join to your question. So I would not, Marina Chikos in this chat said that I'm using the Congolese example and it's hard to connect it to the Peli case. But I would like to just say that I'm using the debate, as you said, I'm using it as an opportunity to learn how the restitution in the case of Roma can be. I mean, it's a learning process, and we have to place this discourse in the international dynamics of restitution. So the Congolese example of the timing, I think it's an important lesson that we can learn from it. And also the other thing which we can learn is that I'm a non-Roma, but what we learned from Peli's panel is that Roma and non-Roma should work together. It's a mutual responsibility. We are, as one of my colleagues, curator Steady Suit said, we are door openers. We are not doing the restitution, but we are also like paving the path, whatever. And the restitution should be done by not us, but with the help, with the support of us. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, I think that perhaps Roma are unique in being established in, long established in many countries throughout Europe. So I'm not sure how that model would be transferred, but I think if we can do it, then something similar could happen with other people. But because of this fact that we have so many long established footholds in many countries, I think us working with established museums and encouraging them to work with us is a good starting point, and I think something that could happen relatively quickly, alongside the other initiatives which have been discussed, like a space of our own, a mobile museum, a virtual inventory. I think they're all fantastic ideas. But I think if we can get the big guns on board as well to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of locating these objects and owning up to the possession of them and celebrating with us their existence and their place in the world, I think that's a good place to start.
Thank you, Daniel. And I think with your comment, we will have to unfortunately conclude this afternoon's conversation. It seems like we would really need much more time and opportunities to engage on this subject. So thank you so much, Angela and the CEU, for providing this space. I hope this is one of the very many where we will have the opportunity to engage with the broader public, since most of us are actually working together already around Roma MoMA. So I would like to just here briefly advertise the Roma MoMA for you, for those of you who are maybe fascinated and intrigued and want to learn more. There is a Roma MoMA page on the ERIAC website at eriac.org, and you can see the Roma MoMA also unraveling in a beautiful way through a blog platform that allows a very inspiring thoughts and reflections here from both Roma and non-Roma superstars of the cultural scene. So we're very happy to be hosting this space. And I would like to now first thank you very much, all of the panelists, Anna, Maria, Nanette, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your experience, and for your commitment also to this unraveling project of Roma restitution. And also thank you so much, CEU and the OFF-Biennale for being partners in this initiative. So I would like to thank you all again. And Angela, I don't know, do you have some final words for us today?
Just thanks for this really enlightening and enriching discussion. So it was really, really great. And I would like to, take it over, this discussion, to tomorrow for our conference. And I would like to encourage you that please register and participate and join us to this really interesting Critical Romani Studies conference, what we are having in the online scene. And thanks again. Thank you. Finito.